Now our next demo actually borrows from the previous demo. This is our checkbox demo, but it uses the button demo from that we just finished looking at. Let's go back and review the button demo. So this code, as you see it here, is the exact code that we looked at earlier in the previous demo. It's been completely unchanged, and I'll remind you that there were two protected methods defined in it for these two things that you see here. Well, a protected class and a protected data member actually. And that's because those need to be visible in the new class that's going to inherit from this, and that's why they were declared originally as protected. We don't need to see this anymore because we've already looked at it in detail. So I'm going to close this tab completely, and let's focus on the new demo code. The first thing you'll notice, apart from all the imports that are always here, is that this demo extends the button demo that we just saw. So it's going to then build on it. It's going to have all the same features, do all the same things, but what we're going to do is add two checkboxes to this new version of the demo. We're going to be overriding the getPane method, and that's why it had to be declared to be protected rather than private in the previous demo. And in turn, we're going to produce a new function, new method called getPane, which returns a border pane. And notice we've defined it to be protected here. And why do you guess that is? Well, it's because, again, we're going to, in a future demo, extend this and inherit from it. And we want this to be visible to the subclass. So you recall in the previous demo, the getPane method returned a pane. We still want that pane, and we still call the original implementation by saying super, meaning the implementation in our superclass of getPane. But now we continue on and do some additional things after instantiating that pane. The first thing we do is we set the font, and we use Times Roman, bold, and italics. And we have, well, actually we're defining fonts. We haven't set them yet. So the one is font bold italic. The next definition is for font bold. The next for font italic. And the last for font normal. Now what do you see when you sit back and look at these four things? Well, hopefully you realize that they're all the different combinations of having and not having bold and italic. So in other words, if you don't have either, that would be this font normal definition. If you have just one, it's font bold or font italic, and if you have both together, it's font bold italic. So in other words, what we're doing is representing all the different combinations of having italics and bold on and off together and different. The reason we're doing that is because we're actually going to use two checkboxes, one for bold and one for italic, and we can check one box or the other or both or none. And we want to be able to translate that to having these four different font combinations. Initially, and this is where we actually do set the font finally, we set the font of the text to font normal, which would be no bold and no italics. Notice that we are using a data member from the superclass, and that's why text had to be declared protected as opposed to private, so that we as a subclass would still have access to it, so we would be able to do this. Now let's scroll down and look at the rest of the code. I'm just going to remove that stuff at the bottom that we don't need to make more room. Okay. Now the checkboxes I mentioned that we're going to be using, we're going to arrange them vertically, so what better node type to use or pane type to use than a VBox to do that. So we're going to create a VBox called pane for checkboxes, and we'll use a vertical gap of 20 within our VBox. And then we're going to set some padding around it. We're going to use insets 5, 5, 5, 5. So in other words, 5 pixels on the top, bottom, left, and right. And then we're going to set the style to border color green. And then we're going to label and create the actual checkboxes, and that happens in these two lines of code that you see here. So I create one checkbox called check bold. Notice we're using the convention that the author introduced of prefixing the UI controls with appropriate little 2 or 3 letter prefix. In this case, CHK stands for checkbox. So this is our bold checkbox. This is our italic checkbox. They're both checkboxes. We define the string that's going to go with them appropriately, bold in this case, italic in this case. We then drop these things into our VBox. So check bold is going to be at the top of our VBox because it's the first child that we add to the VBox, or we called it pane for checkboxes. And then we're going to drop the check italic in, so that's going to appear underneath the other one. So the bold checkbox will be on the top, the italic checkbox on the bottom. And then we're going to do a set right in pane. Now remember, pane is a border pane, so we're going to be putting those checkboxes in the right area of the border pane that we're going to be putting all these things in. Well, we put some of these things in the superclass already, and you saw that. So you know those buttons to move the text left and right are going to be in the bottom section of the border pane. You knew that the text was in the center, and now you know that we're utilizing the right side of the border pane for our two checkboxes. There's nothing on the top, so the top's going to shrink away to nothing, and there's nothing in the left field of the border pane, so it's going to shrink away to nothing as well. Next, we need to catch the events of the checkboxes being either checked or unchecked. So we're going to use an event handler for that, and we're going to call it handler, and we're going to use lambda notation for it, so E arrow, and here's the code for it. Now, given that we will only get in here if a box is checked, we can then go ahead and find out whether the box, whether it was checked or unchecked actually. We'll get into this code, and then we want to ask the question, why are we here? Is it because something that wasn't checked got checked? Or is it that something that was checked became unchecked? And we need to check all the different combinations of what may or may not have happened. So the first thing we do is we don't really care what things were like before. We really care what the current status is. So we check the isSelected method of our check bold, of our bold checkbox. And if it's true that it's selected and the check italic dot is selected is also true. If both those conditions are true, then that means we have two check marks. Both boxes are checked, and if so, it means we want bold and italic at the same time. So to do that, we set font on our text to the font that we've produced, font bold italic. Else, we know that they're not both checked, so we check individually to see which one is checked, bearing in mind that maybe neither is checked, but we don't know that yet. So we first of all check our bold checkbox and ask, is it selected, true or false? If it's true, then that must be the only box that's selected, and therefore we're going to set the font to bold. Otherwise, we will check to see if the italic box is selected, and if it is, then we'll set the font to italic. Then we have a final else, because if we get this far and we haven't done any one of these three things here, the only conclusion we can make is that neither checkbox is checked, and therefore we don't want bold and we also don't want italics. In other words, we want the normal font. So in that case, we do text.setFont and plug in font normal. So the code we just looked at sets up the event handler, but doesn't associate it with the checkboxes. So we need to do that step next, and the last thing to do actually. So we do a check bold dot set on action, and here's where we associate the code we just talked about with checking or unchecking the bold checkbox. And likewise, we do the same with the other checkbox, the italic checkbox. And then at the end of the day, we're ready to return the pane to the caller. So let's try this out and see how it works. So we're going to run the demo. And as you can see, it looks the same as it did last time, except we have these two lovely checkboxes that weren't here before. Currently the font is normal, at least it looks normal to me. We can still move it to the right. We can move the string to the left. But if we come here and click bold, well, lo and behold, the text turns bold. Again, we can still move it left and right. That hasn't changed. I can now uncheck bold and it goes back to normal. I can check bold and italics and I get both at once, or I can just check italics by itself, or neither. And so there you have it. We've taken our previous demo and extended it with a pair of checkboxes and made it a little bit more interesting yet. And that concludes this demo.